This is Facility Science Podcast number 17. I am Jason Doolittle, and today I'm talking about work reception and coordination. And my thoughts on this topic were sort of catalyzed by a book called the Facility Management Handbook, and specifically chapter 24 of that book, which is titled Work Coordination. And since that was sort of the beginning of my thinking on this topic, I decided to dig out the book, and I'll be referencing that chapter going forward. And right now, I'm looking at the third edition of this book. The ideas in this chapter center around what they call the Work Reception and Coordination Center, and they abbreviate that WRC. And the purpose is to receive, prioritize, task, coordinate, and evaluate all work flowing through the facilities department, or at least as much as possible. And the Work Reception and Coordination Center is a conceptual function inside the organization. The physical and practical manifestation of the WRC depends on the size and complexity of the facilities being managed. So in a smaller, simpler organization, the Work Reception and Coordination Center could be a single person with a phone and a laptop. And in a very large, complex organization, the WRC might be its own whole department inside the FM function with its own staff and offices, and then everything else falls somewhere in between that. And with properly trained employees and the right procedures in place, the WRC should be able to handle some large percentage of the facility's workflow without managerial input. That's, something greater than 90% of all the facilities work should be able to be just handled by following procedure routinely inside of the work reception function, or the work reception and coordination function. And also, as a centralized hub for handling work, the WRC will have information necessary to provide reports on the volume and cost and completion status of the work being done by the department, which is useful to have. And the book also points out that the WRC, with appropriate preparation, is also a natural place to integrate your emergency management function. So I mentioned the 5 Work Reception and Coordination Center functions: receive, prioritize, task, coordinate, evaluate. So let's go through each of those kind of one by one here. First is receive. So you want your work reception center to be the single point of contact for all work requests. And there are several sources of work we can talk about here. The first, maybe the most obvious one, is the building occupants or facility users asking for work to be done inside the facility. So one of the first things we need to do is define what are the acceptable work request channels. And there's some possibilities here. There's a phone call, an email, and if you use email, what's the email address that people should send email to? You should also think about, should the email go to a person's email address, or should it go to a separate work request email address? Depends on, again, the size and complexity of the organization. Another possibility is a CMMS maintenance request page, so a web portal where people can make a maintenance request or a service request. Another common one would be the building occupants telling the maintenance staff while they're working on a maintenance job in their area that some work needs to be done. In my opinion, it's generally not a good idea to allow this as a work request channel. The maintenance or service people are going to be busy and distracted, and this kind of request tends to get lost or forgotten. And I would recommend, in this case, giving your field service personnel a script to follow when they're approached with work requests, including something like a business card or something like that with the information about the preferred work request channels. And the script that they have should allow the field person to quickly explain the reason why they're not able to take work requests, and also how the customer will be better served by making their request through the proper channel. And if you do allow work requests to be made in this way, make sure that your field people have a procedure they need to follow to assure that the request gets properly pushed to the work reception center. And there's really no right answer here, but whatever channels you use should be finite, they should be well defined, and they should, maybe more importantly, be easy for the building users to locate and use so that they can make the request that they need to make. Now, as far as receiving requests goes, requests need to be received including enough information to properly plan and schedule the work. And so you kind of have a minimum list of things that you'll need. So who is requesting the work? What work are they requesting? Why are they requesting the work? What maybe department or business unit are they associated with? And who should be contacted about doing the work, and how can that person be contacted? Another thing to think about is who is authorized to request work. in some cases, maybe anyone can request work, anyone who uses the facility. In other cases, maybe you want only department managers or supervisors or other authorized point of contact people to make requests. And the benefit of having a layer in between the building occupants and the work reception center is that the point of contact, the authorized work requester can weed out sort of frivolous requests by policy, and they can also make sure that all work is requested through the proper channels. The downside, though, is that the more layers you create, the more sort of bureaucracy you create and the less efficiency you have, and you could potentially not get requests that you should get because the people sort of outside of the work reception center or whatever are not properly evaluating and prioritizing and forwarding those requests that need to be forwarded. And you should also consider that receiving work requests from a facility user is a customer service function. Ultimately, the facilities exist to serve the business, and the business function is carried out by the people working in the business. And so the people who are responding to emails, answering phone calls, should understand that the people who are sending those emails and making those phone calls are their customers and should be dealt with accordingly. That was the long-winded first source of work, which is the building occupants. The next one would be your maintenance schedules. So you have preventative maintenance or that sort of thing for all your building systems and equipment. And those maintenance schedules also are a source of work. The next one would be your building monitoring system. So you have sensors and analytics and other things that will automatically generate alerts. And those are also sources of work. And in some cases, those alerts will be received by a person and then work orders generated from those alerts. In other cases, you might have the work orders automatically generated and sort of pushed into the workflow by the computerized systems, depends on what you have set up. And then the other sort of, in my experience, big category of sources of work are observations by the facility management staff. And these also, like all the other work, should be pushed through the work reception and coordination center rather than just sort of handled by the person who happens to see them. And I'll talk more about that later on. Then for every work item received from all these sources, the work reception center will create a work order and then prioritize and task and coordinate and evaluate the work. So why is it important for all the work to come through the work reception center? Well, first is that all work can be handled according to the established procedures, and work requests, don't get lost or forgotten because there's a specific way that each one is handled. Work can be properly accounted for and logged and measured and benchmarked and charged to the right business unit or whatever. If you're doing chargebacks in your organization, all of those things can be handled inside the workflow by policy if all the work goes through the central coordinating function. We can also make sure that work is given to the right service provider, and I'll talk about that also a little more later. And work can be coordinated across the facility management team and organization, so that reduces a duplicate or unnecessary effort. And then it also frees the facility manager and other sort of leadership from all the routine tasks that can be handled by policy and frees up their time to do the other things that require their attention. Next is to consider who will monitor these input sources, right? So you need someone or maybe multiple people to answer the phone and check the email and process the CMMS tickets and react to the alerts from the building management system and act on all those inputs, which means in this case generate the work orders and push them into the workflow or contact the appropriate people or whatever. And it might be the same person doing all those things, and it might be different people depending on the volume of work that's coming in. You might have a dedicated work receptionist to do this work. You might, in addition or instead, rotate your technical staff through so they can get a better view of the sort of the big picture of the work that's coming through. But whoever it is, you want to make sure it is someone who's authorized to give as much attention as necessary to receiving work and pushing it into the workflow and not be distracted by doing other work. So basically the work reception function, whoever's doing it, needs to be the most urgent work they're expected to do because it's sort of the starting point of all the stuff that's going to get done by your facility management organization. And then sort of inside this, monitoring the work input sources, how are you going to handle after hours requests or work? Who's going to monitor the alerts or answer the phone or whatever after hours? You might need a call answering service or voicemail for phone calls. Maybe you have on-call technicians after hours that rotate through, or email or web portal. And whatever you do, any mechanism you use for this should be able to direct the user to the most appropriate method to report after-hours emergencies at the facility. And again, since we're trying to centralize all of this stuff inside this one function, we can more easily enforce a policy about how these things should be handled. Okay, that was, what was that, work reception. Now we have prioritization. So that's the second step, is prioritize. And I spoke about work prioritization a bit in number 10 of this podcast, which is about maintenance planning and scheduling. So there's, some work that needs to be done right now, like immediately right this second. Some work can be done today or tomorrow. Some work can be done in a week or so. And some work doesn't really need to be done at all. So the work that needs to be done right now, this is work to solve high priority problems that would pose a risk to life safety or property. And the Work Reception and Coordination Center should have the authority to quickly dispatch the appropriate person or team or whoever by phone or by some other fast communication method. Then we have the work that can be done, today or tomorrow. This is work to solve problems that will affect the operation of the business. And again, the WRC function should be able to identify this type of problem, generate a work order, and schedule the work and task it to the appropriate person. Again, just sort of automatically by policy. And then we have the work that can be done in the next week or so. These are things that should be done, but don't rise to the level of affecting the operation of the business or putting anybody or any property in danger. And then there's even in some cases work that doesn't need to be done at all. And the policy that dictates the workflow through the Work Reception and Coordination Center should be able to identify that kind of work and, again, by policy, either ignore it or inform whoever requested it that doesn't need to be done, or whatever makes sense in your situation. And another bit of policy to think about as far as work prioritization or work routing is by thinking in certain categories. So we have work that is maintenance or repair work versus work that will modify in some way the facility. And so maintenance and repair work is aimed at keeping or returning things to their sort of status quo functionality. Generally, this is sort of automatable in the workflow. Example might be the lights are out, or the air conditioning is not working, or you have a broken door handle. Those kinds of things, which there aren't really any decisions that need to be made here. You just need to identify that the problem exists, get the right parts, send someone out to fix it. And so this is just handled in the workflow. The other type, which is modification work, is work that would make some change to the operation or the workflow in the building or the aesthetics or something like that. And these things are generally not automatable in the workflow. They might need approval from someone depending on what will be affected by the changes. An example might be moving large furniture or adding or removing electrical receptacles or things like that might have an effect on how the building actually operates. And then another way that work is typically categorized is by the dollar value cost. Low cost work can be approved by the work receptionist or coordinator without any kind of management approval, where higher cost work would need approval by a person with the appropriate authority. And low cost and high cost are sort of thresholds that depend on the organization. But again, these are things that can be wrapped up in the policy of the Work Reception and Coordination Center and handled inside the workflow. Now, the next function is the tasking function. So we're going to give the job to the right person. So we need to know, is this something that we do in-house with our own service personnel, or is this something that we hire an outside contractor to do? We also need to know, is the work covered under some type of warranty or service contract? And the knowledge required to decide who should be tasked with certain work. So who has the skills, which contractor do we use for that? How do we tell if there's a warranty or a service contract? That knowledge should be contained within the Work Reception Center workflow. So those decisions can be made with the right knowledge. And so we don't have things like paying for work that should be done under warranty, or hiring someone and paying them to do work that we've already paid someone else to do under a service contract, that sort of thing. Okay, so that was the tasking function. The next is the coordinate function. And I'll read this section directly from the book because they say it pretty well. So, quote, the WRC must coordinate all work, preventive maintenance, cyclical maintenance, maintenance and repair projects, service orders, alteration projects, and capital projects. It is a facility manager's nightmare, for example, for a wall to be painted under cyclic maintenance 2 days before it is demolished as part of an alteration project. Not only is it wasteful, but it destroys the department's credibility. Work should be coordinated with other service organizations. The WRC should be aware of all conferences, parties, facility projects, and after-hours activities so that proper support and no conflicting activities will be scheduled. In a large organization, one person should coordinate work, control the flow of paperwork through the facilities department, and task all non-routine work. In a medium-sized organization, the amount of work can be small enough so that the facility manager or work receptionist can also function as a work coordinator. That's the end of the quote. And I have a few thoughts on this. First, I have seen the case where a wall was painted days before it was scheduled to be torn down, so that is a real thing. Also, with respect to coordinating after-hours activities and parties and etc. with the Work Reception and Coordination Center, even if they don't directly require facilities work, many of these activities are affected by, say, HVAC system settings. So think after-hours temperature setbacks. The temperature goes to a higher temperature or lower depending on what climate you're in. Or they might have higher than normal, say, power requirements or power requirements in places where there isn't normally power. And these are things that might be difficult for the facility users to overcome, but are generally trivial for the work reception and coordination functions to deal with if they're informed of the event beforehand and can handle those situations ahead of time or have someone there to handle the situations as they arise. And there's also the issue of duplicated effort. And this is one of the reasons I think your maintenance or service technicians should be required to pass all verbal maintenance requests and even things they might observe themselves through the WRC for tasking. And it's easy to imagine multiple technicians being informed of or observing the same issue and then taking steps to work toward completing it. So, gathering documentation or parts or whatever without the knowledge that someone else is doing the same work. Okay, so the central coordination function makes sense even with the people whose job it is actually to do the work. This is obviously a waste of effort for multiple people to be working on the same job, not knowing each other is doing it. And then the last function is the evaluate function, and there are two things to evaluate. First is the work getting done to the appropriate standard, and then second, are the building occupants satisfied with the work that's being done? And the Work Reception Center has the information to evaluate whether the work is getting done to the appropriate standard, so they can tell is it being completed on time and within budget. How you measure that differs, whether it's a routine maintenance or whether it's some type of capital project or whatever. Is the technical staffing adequate for the amount of work that needs to be completed? So are we completing the work orders in time? And if we're not, why aren't we? Do we need to add staff or whatever? The WRC should have the information to determine this kind of thing. And another thing is we can tell maybe do the number of work orders in a particular area or on a piece of equipment indicate some problem that needs to be looked into. And if all the work goes through one place, then this is something that we can determine. And then the second thing is to determine if the building occupants are satisfied with the work being done. And this can be determined by survey, again, initiated in the WRC, and then online or written or phone surveys. Since this function is already in contact with the people who are requesting the work, they're the natural place to then ask those people if they're happy with how the work was completed. So the basic idea here, this whole work reception and coordination concept, is that you have a functional unit inside your facility management organization called the Work Reception and Coordination Center, WRC. You have that combined with a policy about how work will be received and how it will be prioritized and tasked and coordinated and evaluated. And then the WRC uses the policy to handle all routine work using the appropriate workflow. So you want to sort of devise what the workflow is. And for work requiring approval or planning, the WRC forwards that work to the appropriate approval or planning parties. And then anything not covered by the policy is forwarded to the facility manager for evaluation and approval. And things that end up in this category may prompt some revision of the WRC policy to cover a broader range of work, thereby freeing the facility manager's attention from a larger group of items that can be handled routinely and don't need the facility manager's attention. And this kind of policy and workflow can be built directly into many CMMS systems, computerized maintenance management systems. So you may be able to improve your operation just by taking full advantage of the software packages you already use. And that's about all I have to say about work reception and coordination for now. You can find my notes for this topic at facilityscience.com, and this is number 17. I'll also include a link to the Facility Management Handbook in case you want to buy a copy for yourself. If you have any questions or comments about this topic or suggestions for other topics you would like to hear about, you can contact me by email at podcast@facilityscience.com or at facilityscience on Twitter. If you like this podcast and you want to help me keep making it, head over to facilityscience.com/support and see if any of the support options there appeal to you. As usual, I hope you find this useful, and thanks for listening.